"You look like a man who appreciates good coffee," she said, not waiting for him to confirm or deny, before launching into a detailed explanation of why the beans from the supplier in Deadwood were superior to anything coming up from Cheyenne. Her hands moved as she spoke, gesturing with such animation that the small basket she carried swung like a pendulum. "I tell Mr. Henderson every single week that he should stock more of the dark roast, but does he listen?" "Well, sometimes he does, but mostly I think he just nods to be polite because I come in here 3 times a week, and I always have something to say about his inventory." Ryland stood there, his hand still on the door frame, completely arrested by this force of nature in calico. She could not have been more than 22 or 23, though her confidence suggested someone who had lived twice that many years. Her dress was simple but clean, the kind a respectable woman wore for everyday errands, and her hair was pinned up in a style that was already coming loose, little tendrils escaping around her face. "I am sorry," she said suddenly, her cheeks flushing pink. "My husband used to say that I could talk the paint off a barn, and here I am proving him right even though he has been gone 2 years now. You probably came in here for supplies, not to hear a widow ramble about coffee beans." "Your husband passed," Ryland found his voice, surprising himself. He had not engaged in voluntary conversation with anyone in nearly 6 months. "Cholera," she said, her voice softening for the first time. "Took him in half the camp in '74. But I am still here, still talking, much to the dismay of anyone who thought a period of mourning should include a period of silence." She smiled then, but it was edged with something sharper. "I am Rebecca Connolly, and you are Ryland Anders." "Well, Mr. Anders, are you new to lead, or just passing through on your way to the goldfields?" He should have said passing through. That was always the answer. Keep moving, never settle, never let anyone know your name or your business. But something about Rebecca Connolly made him pause. Maybe it was the way she looked at him, direct and unafraid. Maybe it was the fact that in a life full of silence and violence, her constant stream of words felt like water in a desert. "Not sure yet," he said. She studied him for a moment, her head tilting slightly to one side. "You have the look of a man carrying weight, not the kind that comes from saddlebags either. The kind that sits in your shoulders and makes you forget how to smile." Before he could respond to that uncomfortably accurate assessment, she was moving again, heading toward the counter where an older man with spectacles was watching the exchange with poorly concealed amusement. "Mr. Henderson, this is Mr. Anders. He is new to town and will probably need the usual supplies. And please, for the love of all that is holy, try to sell him the good coffee, not that swill you keep trying to pass off as premium roast." Mr. Henderson chuckled. "Yes, Mrs. Connolly. Anything else you would like to manage about my store today?" "Well, now that you mention it, the fabric section is looking rather disorganized, and I noticed you have been putting the canned goods on the bottom shelf when everyone knows they should be at eye level for easy browsing." She winked at Ryland. "See what I mean? I cannot help myself." Over the next hour, Ryland learned more about Rebecca Connolly than he had learned about any person in years. She had come to the Dakota Territory with her husband in 1873, full of hopes for striking it rich. Her husband Thomas had been a kind man but not a particularly lucky one. They had never found gold, but they had found a community in Lead, and Rebecca had been happy enough with that. After Thomas died, she had taken work as a seamstress and occasionally helped at the boarding house run by Mrs. Templeton, a stern woman who Rebecca described as having a heart of gold buried under approximately 40 layers of propriety and judgment. "Mrs. Templeton says I talk too much for a wife," Rebecca said as they stood outside the general store, Ryland's supplies now loaded onto his horse. She said it while I was still married, and she has said it approximately 200 times since Thomas passed. Apparently, the amount I talk is directly correlated to my value as a marriage prospect, and the consensus around town is that the correlation is inverse. She laughed, but there was hurt underneath it. I used to try to be quieter. Thomas appreciated the effort, I think, but he never demanded it. Still, I heard the whispers. Poor Thomas, married to a woman who never stops talking, as if my words were some kind of affliction he had to endure. Ryland felt something crack open inside his chest, some sealed-off place he thought had turned to stone. "I have been silent too long," he said quietly. The words surprised him. They were more than he had intended to say, more than he had said to anyone in memory. Rebecca looked at him with those sharp, intelligent eyes. "Then maybe we are a good balance, Mr. Anders. I will talk and you will listen, and perhaps somewhere in the middle we will both find what we are looking for." He should have ridden out of Lead that afternoon. The man he had come to find lived 3 miles outside of town, and the job should have been simple. Ride in, complete the contract, ride out. That was how Ryland had lived for the past 8 years, ever since the war ended and he found himself without purpose or direction. He had drifted into the kind of work that did not ask questions about a man's past, and he had been good at it. Too good, maybe, but he did not ride out. Instead, he found himself accepting a room at Mrs. Templeton's boarding house, enduring the older woman's suspicious glares and pointed questions about his business in Lead. And the next morning, when Rebecca knocked on his door with a basket of fresh biscuits and an invitation to walk with her to the edge of town where wildflowers were blooming, he said yes. "I know I should not be so forward," Rebecca said as they walked along the rutted road that led past the last of the mining camps. A respectable widow is supposed to maintain a certain distance from strange men, especially strange men who wear their guns low and look like they have seen the darker side of the world. But I have never been particularly good at being what I am supposed to be. Thomas used to say it was my finest quality, though I suspect he was being generous. "Tell me about him," Ryland said. It was easier than talking about himself. Rebecca's expression softened. Thomas was gentle, kind. The sort of man who would give away his last dollar to someone who needed it more, even if it meant we went hungry. He believed in the goodness of people, which made him a terrible prospector because he was always getting swindled. She smiled at the memory. "But he loved me, and he never once asked me to be smaller or quieter or less than I was. That is worth more than all the gold in these hills." Sounds like a good man. He was, and I loved him. But I also know that what we had was a gentle kind of love, the kind built on friendship and shared hopes more than passion. I do not regret it. How could I? But sometimes I wonder what it would be like to feel something more intense, something that burns instead of glows. She glanced at him sidelong. "Is that terrible to admit?" "No," Ryland said. "It is honest." They walked in companionable silence for a while, which seemed to be a rarity for Rebecca. When they reached the wildflower meadow she had mentioned, the sight took Ryland's breath. Purple lupine and yellow balsam root covered the hillside in a riot of color, swaying in the breeze that came down from the mountains. "This is where I come when the town gets to be too much," Rebecca said, settling down on a flat rock and arranging her skirts around her. "When I can feel the weight of all those judgments and expectations pressing down on me. Out here, I can be as loud or as quiet as I want, and the flowers do not care either way." Ryland sat down nearby, his body angled so he could watch both Rebecca and the approaches to the meadow. Old habits. "Why do you stay, if the town makes you feel that way?" "Because it is also home. Because Mrs. Templeton, for all her criticism, gave me work when I desperately needed it. Because Mr. Henderson lets me prattle on about his inventory and never complains. Because Thomas is buried here, and leaving feels like abandoning him. She picked a lupine flower and twirled it between her fingers. And maybe because some small part of me keeps hoping that one day the town will accept me as I am, instead of constantly wishing I was someone else. Their loss if they do not, Ryland said. Rebecca looked at him with surprise and something that might have been hope. You are a dangerous man, Mr. Anders, not because of the gun you carry, but because you say things like that and make me believe them. That night, lying in his narrow bed at the boarding house, Ryland thought about the contract that had brought him to lead. Silas Whitmore, accused of stealing another man's claim and killing his partner in the process. The deceased partner's brother had paid Ryland half upfront with the promise of the rest when the job was done. It was straightforward work, the kind Ryland had done dozens of times before. But now, there was Rebecca with her endless words and her honesty and her hurt that she tried to cover with humor. Now there was the way she had looked at the wildflowers, like they were proof that beauty could exist even in harsh places. Now, there was the crack in his chest that had widened into something that felt dangerously close to caring. He got up before dawn and rode out to Whitmore's claim. The man was already awake, panning for gold in the creek that ran behind his rough cabin. Ryland watched him for a while from the cover of the trees, his hand resting on his gun. It would be easy. One shot, maybe two, and the contract would be complete. He could collect his payment and ride out of Lead before Rebecca even knew he was gone, but he did not draw his gun. Instead, he turned his horse around and rode back to town, the unused bullet still in his saddlebag. When he reached Mrs. Templeton's boarding house, he went straight to his room and took out the small leather notebook where he kept records of his contracts. With steady hands, he tore out the page about Whitmore, walked to the stove in the common room and fed it to the flames. "That is an expensive fire you are feeding," Mrs. Templeton said from the doorway, making him jump. The old woman's eyes were sharp behind her spectacles. "Whatever you just burned must have been worth something." "My past," Ryland said simply. Mrs. Templeton studied him for a long moment. "And I suppose this sudden change of heart would not have anything to do with a certain talkative widow. I am not having this conversation with you, madam." "Oh, I think you are." She came further into the room, her posture stern but her eyes not unkind. "Rebecca Connolly is a good woman, too good for whatever you were planning when you came to this town. But she has also been hurt enough by this world, and I will not stand by and watch another man add to that burden. So if you are planning to court her, you had better mean it. And if you are planning to break her heart, you had better ride out now before I get my husband's shotgun and make the decision for you." Ryland met her gaze steadily. "I mean it. Then you should know that half this town thinks she is unmarriageable because she talks too much. The other half thinks she is too independent and opinionated to ever be a proper wife. Personally, I think they are all fools, but their opinions will make your life difficult if you choose to stay here. I have faced worse than gossip, madam." Mrs. Templeton's expression softened slightly. "I believe you have. Very well, Mr. Anders. You have my permission to court Rebecca, not that she would care one bit whether you had it or not. That girl has never let anyone's opinion stop her from doing what she wants, which is precisely why I admire her, even if I give her grief about it." Over the next weeks, Ryland found himself drawn deeper into Rebecca's orbit. She seemed to be everywhere in Lead, her voice carrying across the street as she debated the merits of different fabrics with other women, or explaining to the butcher exactly how she preferred her cuts of meat, or organizing a fundraiser for a family whose cabin had burned down. And everywhere she went, Ryland found reasons to follow. He helped her carry supplies from the general store. He escorted her to church on Sundays, enduring the curious stares and whispered speculation. He sat in Mrs. Templeton's parlor while Rebecca sewed, listening to her talk about everything from her childhood in Ohio to her opinions on territorial politics, to her theories about why the mine yields had been declining. "You never talk about yourself," she observed one evening, setting down her needlework to look at him directly. "I have told you my entire life story, probably twice over, and I know almost nothing about you except that you are a good listener and you make me feel safe." Ryland shifted uncomfortably. "Not much to tell." "I doubt that very much. You have scars, Ryland. I have seen them. And you have the eyes of someone who has done things he wishes he could forget. I am not asking you to confess your sins to me. But if we are going to continue this, whatever this is, I need to know that you trust me enough to let me see at least some of who you really are." She was right, and he knew it. So he told her, not everything but enough, about growing up on a farm in Missouri, about losing his parents to a fever when he was 15, about joining the army and fighting in the war, watching friends die in mud and blood for causes that seemed less clear with every passing year, about drifting afterward, taking work where he could find it, slowly sliding into a life where violence was just another tool in his belt. "I am not a good man, Rebecca," he said quietly. "I have done things that would make you turn away from me if you knew the details. I came to this town to kill a man, and the only reason I did not is because I met you." Rebecca was silent for a long moment, absorbing this. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. "I appreciate your honesty. Truly I do. But you are wrong about one thing. You are a good man, Ryland. Maybe you have not always done good things, but the fact that you chose not to kill that man, the fact that you are sitting here telling me the truth instead of lying or leaving, that tells me who you really are underneath everything else. How can you be so sure?" "Because I see the way you are with people in this town. You helped old Mr. Peterson fix his roof last week without being asked. You gave money to the widow Anderson when her son got sick. You treat me with more respect and kindness than men who claim to be pillars of the community. Actions matter more than words, Ryland, and your actions tell me that whatever you were before you came here, you are choosing to be someone different now." He wanted to believe her. God, how he wanted to believe that he could be the man she saw when she looked at him. "What if I fail? What if the past catches up with me?" "Then we will face it together," Rebecca said simply. "I am not some delicate flower who needs to be protected from the harsh realities of the world, Ryland. I have lost a husband, survived in a mining town with hardly any money, and endured years of people telling me I am too much. I am stronger than I look. And if you are willing to try to be the man you want to be, then I am willing to stand beside you while you do it." That night, Ryland kissed her for the first time on Mrs. Templeton's front porch. It was gentle and tentative, a question more than a declaration. Rebecca answered by wrapping her arms around his neck and pulling him closer, kissing him back with an intensity that took his breath away. "I have been wanting you to do that for weeks," she said when they finally broke apart. "I was starting to think I was going to have to do it myself, propriety be damned." Ryland laughed, a sound that felt rusty and unfamiliar in his throat. "I was trying to be respectful. Respect is good. But a little boldness would not go amiss either." She smiled up at him, her face illuminated by the lamplight spilling from the windows. "I meant what I said earlier, Ryland. I am falling in love with you. Maybe I have been falling since the moment you walked into Henderson's store and let me talk your ear off without complaint. I know it is fast, and I know we should probably be more cautious, but I have never been good at doing what I am supposed to do." "I am falling in love with you too," Ryland admitted. The words felt strange on his tongue, vulnerable and dangerous, but they were also true. I did not think I was capable of this anymore, of feeling this way about someone. We are all capable of more than we think, Rebecca said softly. The question is whether we are brave enough to try. The next day, Ryland went to see the man who had hired him to kill Silas Whitmore. Edgar Thorne ran a supply warehouse in Deadwood and had the kind of wealth that came from being smart and ruthless in equal measure. He was not pleased when Ryland told him the contract was void and returned half the payment. "That is not how this works, Anders," Thorne said, his voice cold. "We had an agreement. You do not get to just walk away because you developed a conscience." "I am walking away," Ryland said flatly. "Find someone else to do your killing. Whitmore murdered my brother. He deserves to pay for that. Then take it to the law, get a trial, but I am done with this kind of work." Thorne's expression hardened. "You think you can just quit? You think there are not consequences?" "I know people, Anders. People who would be very interested to learn about your history, all those jobs you have done over the years, all those bodies you have left behind." "You want to expose me, go ahead," Ryland said, surprising himself with how calm he felt. "I am not running anymore. I am staying in Lead and I am going to make a life there. If the law comes for me, I will face it. But I am not killing Whitmore and I am not taking any more contracts. This conversation is over." He walked out before Thorne could respond, half expecting a bullet in his back. But nothing came except the sound of the warehouse door slamming behind him. When he returned to Lead, he found Rebecca in the meadow with the wildflowers, sitting on the same rock where they had sat that first time. She looked up as he approached, and something in his expression must have told her that the conversation had not gone well. "What happened?" He told her everything, including Thorne's threats. To his relief, Rebecca did not panic or demand that he leave town to protect her. Instead, she just nodded thoughtfully. "So we might have trouble coming," she said. "That is not ideal, but it is not the end of the world either. We will figure it out together. You are not afraid. Of course I am afraid, but I am also tired of letting fear dictate my choices. I have spent too much of my life trying to be smaller and quieter because I was afraid of what people would think or say. I am done with that. If trouble comes, we will face it. In the meantime, I am going to keep living my life and loving you, and anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly." Her courage humbled him. "How did you get to be so brave?" "I am not brave. I am just stubborn and tired of apologizing for who I am." She stood up and took his hands in hers. "Marry me, Ryland." He stared at her, certain he had misheard. "What, marry me? I know it is forward and I know you are supposed to be the one asking, but I have never been very good at waiting for what I want. I love you. You love me. We both know life is too short and too uncertain to waste time with long courtships and careful planning. So marry me. Today, tomorrow, next week, whenever. Just say yes." Ryland felt that crack in his chest split wide open, flooding him with more feeling than he had thought himself capable of. "Yes," he said hoarsely. "God, yes." Rebecca threw her arms around him, laughing and crying at the same time. "Then we need to go tell Mrs. Templeton before I lose my nerve. She's going to have about 20 opinions on this, and at least half of them will be about proper waiting periods and respectability." Mrs. Templeton did indeed have opinions, most of them expressed at high volume and with considerable arm waving. But underneath the bluster, Ryland could see that she was pleased. She even offered to host the wedding at the boarding house, which was the closest thing Lead had to a proper venue for celebrations. They were married 2 weeks later by the circuit preacher who came through town once a month. It was a simple ceremony with Mrs. Templeton and Mr. Henderson as witnesses, but Rebecca looked more beautiful than Ryland had ever seen her in a dress she had sewn herself from blue calico. When he slipped a simple gold band on her finger, his hands were steady for the first time in years. "I promise to listen to every word you say for the rest of our lives," he said during the vows, making Rebecca laugh through her tears. "And I promise to never stop talking," she replied, "even when you are old and tired and wish I would give you some peace. I will keep filling the silence until there is none left." The first few months of married life were a revelation for Ryland. He had forgotten what it was like to wake up next to someone he loved, to share meals and conversations and the small, mundane moments that made up a life. Rebecca moved into his room at the boarding house temporarily while they looked for a place of their own, and Mrs. Templeton pretended to be scandalized by the impropriety even as she slipped them extra portions at dinner and made sure they had privacy in the evenings. Ryland found work as a ranch hand at one of the larger spreads outside of town. The owner, a gruff man named Samuel Porter, did not ask too many questions about Ryland's past, and the work was hard but honest. Ryland threw himself into it, finding satisfaction in physical labor that built things instead of destroying them. In the evenings, he would come home to find Rebecca waiting for him, full of stories about her day. She had expanded her seamstress work and was now making dresses for half the women in lead, including some of the wealthier miners' wives from Deadwood who traveled specifically to commission her work. "Mrs. Patterson wants a dress with lace from France," Rebecca told him one night, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Can you imagine? Lace from France, all the way out here in the Dakota territory." I told her it would take months to get the material, and she just said she did not care. She would wait however long it took because my work was the best she had ever seen. Me, the woman everyone says talks too much to be a proper wife. "You are a proper wife," Ryland said, pulling her into his lap. "You are my wife, and that makes you perfect." "Flatterer," she said, but she was smiling. "Though I do appreciate the sentiment. I heard Mrs. Patterson talking to Mrs. Templeton yesterday. She said, and I quote, 'I do not care if Rebecca Anders talks a blue streak. She has magic in her fingers when it comes to sewing, and I would rather have a chatty seamstress than a silent one who cannot sew a straight seam.'" "High praise," Ryland said dryly. "The highest." "Do you know what this means? It means people are starting to value my work more than they judge my personality. It means I am building a reputation based on skill instead of gossip. It means maybe, just maybe, I can be exactly who I am and still be successful." Watching her joy, Ryland felt his own chest swell with pride. This was what he wanted to give her, not just his love, but the space to be fully herself without apology or shame. But the peace did not last. 6 months after their wedding, Edgar Thorne came to lead. Ryland was at the ranch when he heard. One of the other hands rode out with a message from Rebecca, delivered in her hasty scrawl. "Thorne is here, looking for you. Be careful." He rode back to town faster than was probably wise, his heart pounding with a fear he had not felt since the war. If Thorne had come himself, instead of sending hired guns, that meant he wanted something more than Ryland's death. But what? He found Thorne in the saloon, sitting at a corner table with a glass of whiskey and an expression of calculated patience. The man looked up as Ryland entered, and something like satisfaction crossed his face. "Anders, I was wondering when you would show up." "What do you want, Thorne?" Ryland kept his hand near his gun, aware of the other patrons watching with undisguised interest. "To talk. Sit down." Ryland remained standing. "I have nothing to say to you." "Then just listen. I know you think I came here for revenge, but you are wrong. I came here with a business proposition." Thorne gestured to the empty chair. "Sit, please. This does not have to be unpleasant." Against his better judgment, Ryland sat. "I am listening." I did some investigating after you left, Thorne said. Turns out Silas Whitmore did not kill my brother after all. My brother's partner did, then blamed it on Whitmore and came to me for money to hire you. The partner is currently awaiting trial in Rapid City, and Whitmore is a free man. Ryland felt the knot in his chest loosen slightly. So you do not want Whitmore dead anymore, correct? But I do still need someone with your particular skills. Not for killing, Thorne added quickly as Ryland started to rise. For protection. I am expanding my operations into some rougher territories, and I need men who can handle themselves if things get dangerous. It is honest work, Anders. I pay well, and there would be no more contracts, no more killing, just guarding shipments and occasionally discouraging people who might be thinking about causing trouble. Not interested. I am offering you $500 a month. Ryland paused. That was more money than he could make in 6 months as a ranch hand. Money that could buy a house for Rebecca. Money that could give them security and a real future. I know you are trying to build a new life, Thorne continued. I know you have a wife now. I am not trying to drag you back into the darkness, Anders. I am offering you a legitimate opportunity to use your skills for something legal. Think about it. You could give your wife everything she deserves. She deserves a husband who comes home alive every night, Ryland said. I am not interested in your offer, Thorne. Find someone else. He stood up and walked out of the saloon, aware of Thorne's eyes on his back. But this time, the expected bullet did not come. Neither did threats or warnings. Thorne simply let him go. Rebecca was waiting for him at the boarding house, pacing the common room with barely contained anxiety. When she saw him, she rushed over and grabbed his arms, looking him over for injuries. I am fine, he assured her. He just wanted to offer me a job. A job doing what? Ryland told her about the offer, including the salary. He watched her eyes widen at the sum, saw her doing the mental calculations of what that kind of money could mean for them. That is a lot of money, she said slowly. Enough to buy a house. Maybe even enough to buy some land, start a real homestead. It is also dangerous work. Maybe not as dangerous as what I was doing before, but dangerous enough. I would be gone weeks at a time, traveling with shipments through territory where bandits and hostile tribes are common. There is a good chance I would not always come back. Rebecca bit her lip, thinking, what do you want to do? I want to keep working at the ranch. I want to come home to you every night. I want to build a life that is slow and steady and safe, even if it means we have less money. He took her hands in his. But I also want to give you everything you deserve. So if you want me to take Thorne's offer, I will. I will do whatever it takes to make you happy. You make me happy, Rebecca said firmly. You, as you are right now, working an honest job and coming home every night. I do not need a big house or land or anything else that money can buy. I just need you alive and whole and here with me. So tell Thorne no. Tell him you have everything you need right here in Lead. Relief washed over Ryland like a summer rain. You are sure? I have never been more sure of anything. Well, except maybe marrying you. That was pretty easy to be sure about. They went together to the saloon to tell Thorne the answer. The businessman took it with a philosophical shrug. Cannot say I am surprised. You have gone soft, Anders. But I suppose that is not the worst thing a man can do. He stood up and tossed some coins on the table for his drink. For what it is worth, I hope it works out for you. Not many men like us get a second chance. I am not like you anymore, Ryland said. Thorne smiled, but it was not unkind. Maybe not. Maybe you really have changed. I suppose time will tell. After he left, Rebecca turned to Ryland with a thoughtful expression. Do you think he is right? That you have changed? I know I have. You changed me, Rebecca. You made me want to be better than I was. No, she said, shaking her head. I did not change you. I just gave you a reason to become who you already were underneath all that darkness. The good was always there, Ryland. You just needed to believe in it. That winter, they bought a small cabin on the outskirts of Lead using money they had saved from both their jobs. It was not much, just 2 rooms and a loft, but it was theirs. Rebecca immediately set about making it a home, sewing curtains and cushions, and insisting on painting the walls a cheerful yellow despite Ryland's protests that it was too bright. "We have spent enough time in darkness," she said, standing back to admire her handiwork. "This house is going to be full of light and color and life. You will get used to it." She was right. He did get used to it. He got used to waking up in their own bed with sunlight streaming through those yellow walls. He got used to the sound of Rebecca's sewing machine in the afternoons, and her voice filling every corner of their small home. He got used to being happy. In the spring of 1877, Rebecca discovered she was pregnant. She told him over breakfast one morning, setting down her coffee cup and just blurting it out in typical Rebecca fashion. "I am going to have a baby." "Well, we are going to have a baby. Or I suppose more accurately, I am going to have the baby, but we are both going to be parents." "Oh God, we are going to be parents. Is it normal to be terrified and excited at the same time?" Ryland sat there in stunned silence for a moment before a grin spread across his face. "We are having a baby. That is what I just said, yes. Were you not listening?" "Oh, who am I kidding? You are always listening. That is one of the things I love most about you. You listen like every word I say matters." "Every word does matter," Ryland said, getting up to pull her into his arms. "And you are going to be an amazing mother." "I am going to be a mother who talks too much, and our poor child is going to grow up never experiencing a moment of silence." "Sounds perfect to me." The pregnancy was not easy. Rebecca suffered terrible morning sickness for the first few months, and as she grew larger, the summer heat made her irritable and uncomfortable. But through it all, she kept working, kept talking, kept being herself with the same fierce determination that had first drawn Ryland to her. The baby came in late October during the first snowfall of the season. Ryland paced outside their cabin while Mrs. Templeton and the midwife attended to Rebecca inside. He could hear her screaming, could hear the midwife's calm instructions, could hear Mrs. Templeton's surprisingly gentle encouragements. Every sound made him want to break down the door and be with her, but Mrs. Templeton had been very clear that he would only be in the way. After what felt like hours but was probably less than one, he heard a new sound. A baby's cry, thin and reedy but undeniably alive. Moments later, Mrs. Templeton emerged, her face flushed but smiling. "You have a son," she said. "And your wife is asking for you, though I warn you, she is already talking the poor midwife's ear off about how she wants at least 3 more children after this." Ryland barely heard the rest as he rushed inside. Rebecca was propped up in their bed, sweaty and exhausted and more beautiful than he had ever seen her. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the blankets she had sewn herself, and she was looking down at it with such love that Ryland felt his throat close up with emotion. "Come meet your son," Rebecca said, her voice hoarse but happy. "Come meet Robert Thomas Anders." Ryland sat down carefully on the edge of the bed and looked at the baby. Robert was red-faced and squalling, his tiny fists waving in the air, but he was perfect. Absolutely perfect. "Robert Thomas," Ryland repeated. "After your husband." "After both of the good men in my life," Rebecca corrected gently. "Thomas taught me what it meant to be loved gently. You taught me what it meant to be loved fiercely. I wanted our son to carry both those legacies." Over the next months, Ryland discovered that being a father was both easier and harder than he had expected. Robert was a healthy baby, but he had inherited his mother's tendency to make his opinions known loudly and at all hours. Rebecca thought this was hilarious. "He is just like me," she said one night as she nursed a fussing Robert while simultaneously explaining to Ryland her plans for expanding her sewing business. "He has something to say, and he is going to say it whether we want to hear it or not. I could not be prouder." Ryland, exhausted from a long day at the ranch followed by a night of minimal sleep, just shook his head fondly. "You would be proud that our son never stops crying." "He is not crying, he is communicating. There is a difference." And honestly, after years of being told I talk too much, it is refreshing to have someone in the house who is even louder than I am. Takes some of the pressure off. As Robert grew, Lead continued to change around them. The gold rush was slowing down, but the town was becoming more established, more permanent. New businesses opened. A proper school was built. The population grew more diverse, with families replacing the rough miners and prospectors who had first settled the area. Rebecca's sewing business flourished. She was now employing 2 other women and had orders backed up for months. Women came from all over the territory to get her dresses, and she had even started shipping garments to customers in cities like Denver and San Francisco. "I am thinking about writing a book," she announced one evening when Robert was about 2 years old. "About sewing techniques and pattern making. Mrs. Patterson said she knows a publisher in Chicago who might be interested." "You should do it," Ryland said. "You have knowledge worth sharing." Do you know what people said when I first started talking about this? They said no one would want to read a book written by a woman who talks too much. As if my tendency to speak somehow disqualifies me from having worthwhile things to say. But I am going to do it anyway, because I am done letting other people's opinions dictate my choices. She did write the book. It took her 2 years, but in 1881, The Art of Fine Sewing, A Practical Guide for Women of the West by Rebecca Anders was published. It was a modest success, selling enough copies that the publisher asked for a second book. By then, they had 2 more children. A daughter named Ruth, born in 1879, who was quiet and thoughtful in a way that seemed impossible given her parentage. And another son, Michael, born in 1881, who was every bit as loud and opinionated as his mother. Their cabin had been expanded twice and now had 4 rooms and a proper loft. Ryland had been promoted to foreman at the ranch, and his salary had increased enough that they were comfortable, if not wealthy. They had a garden that Rebecca tended with the same intense focus she brought to everything else. They had friends in town, including Mrs. Templeton, who had become an honorary grandmother to their children. Life was good. Better than good. It was everything Ryland had never thought he would have. One evening in the summer of 1882, Ryland was sitting on their porch watching Robert and Ruth play in the yard while Rebecca nursed Michael inside. The sun was setting over the Black Hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and Ryland felt a peace so profound, it almost hurt. Rebecca came out to join him, Michael asleep in her arms. She settled into the chair next to his with a contented sigh. "You ever think about where we would be if you had just passed through Lead that day?" she asked. "If you had not stopped at Henderson's store, if I had not talked your ear off about coffee beans." "I think about it sometimes," Ryland admitted. "I think I would probably be dead in some nameless town, killed for money I did not even need, or in jail, or just drifting, still silent, still hollow." "I think I would still be here," Rebecca said thoughtfully. "Still sewing, still talking too much, still trying to prove to everyone that I was worth more than their judgments. But I would be lonely. I would be successful, maybe, but lonely. You regret it. Sometimes the town still talks." "I know you hear the whispers. Let them talk," Rebecca said firmly. Let them say I talk too much for a wife. I have a husband who loves me exactly as I am, 3 beautiful children, a successful business, and a published book. I think I am doing just fine for someone who supposedly has too many opinions." Ryland reached over and took her free hand, lacing their fingers together. "I love you. I love you too. Thank you for listening to me all these years. For never once asking me to be quieter or smaller or less than I am. Thank you for teaching me how to speak again, how to live again." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset and their children, wrapped in the life they had built together. Years continued to pass in a steady rhythm of seasons and small joys. Robert grew into a serious boy who loved reading and showed an aptitude for numbers that surprised both his parents. Ruth revealed an artistic talent, spending hours drawing pictures of the landscape around Lead. Michael was the wild one, always getting into trouble, always full of questions and energy. In 1885, Rebecca had their 4th and final child, a daughter they named Grace. By then, Rebecca was 33 and Ryland was 37, and they both agreed their family was complete. 4 children. Rebecca marveled one night as she nursed Grace while simultaneously helping Robert with his arithmetic homework, and telling Ruth where she had put the drawing pencils, and reminding Michael for the 3rd time to please take off his muddy boots before coming inside. "We have 4 children, Ryland. Remember when we were worried we could not afford one?" "I remember," Ryland said, rescuing a stack of Rebecca's papers from Michael's enthusiastic gestures. "I remember a lot of things, mostly how much I love you." "Flatterer," Rebecca said, but her eyes were soft. "Though I suppose after 9 years of marriage you have earned the right to flatter me occasionally." "Only occasionally." "Well, daily would be better, but I will take what I can get." In 1886, Ryland was offered a partnership in the ranch. Mr. Porter was getting older and wanted to transition to a less active role, and he trusted Ryland to help run the operation. It meant more responsibility, but also more money and a stake in something lasting. "You should do it," Rebecca said when he told her about the offer. "You have worked so hard for this, you deserve it. It will mean longer hours sometimes, more time away from home. And I will be here when you get back, talking about everything you missed, as always." She smiled. "Take the partnership, Ryland, build something permanent. We have already built a family together. Now build a legacy." He took the partnership. The ranch flourished under his and Mr. Porter's joint management, and within a few years, they had expanded to include cattle operations alongside the horses they had been raising. Rebecca's 2nd book was published in 1887. This one focused on business practices for women entrepreneurs. It sold even better than the first, and Rebecca found herself in the strange position of being something of a celebrity. She was invited to give talks in Deadwood and Rapid City, and even once in Denver, though she turned down most of the invitations because she did not want to be away from her family. "It is strange," she told Ryland after turning down yet another speaking invitation. "For so long I wanted people to value what I had to say, and now that they do, all I really want is to be here with you and the children. Is that terrible? Am I wasting an opportunity? You are choosing what matters most to you," Ryland said. "There is nothing terrible about that." In 1890, Robert turned 13 and announced he wanted to go to boarding school in the East to prepare for college. It was a blow to both Ryland and Rebecca, but they supported his decision. "He is so much smarter than either of us," Rebecca said as they helped Robert pack for his journey. "He deserves opportunities we could never give him here." "He got his intelligence from you," Ryland said. "You taught him to be curious, to question everything, to never accept easy answers. And you taught him to be steady and reliable and true to his word. That is worth more than intelligence." They put Robert on the train to Boston in the fall of 1890, both of them fighting tears as they waved goodbye. Ruth cried openly, and Michael tried to act tough, but failed. Only Grace, at 5 years old, seemed unbothered, more interested in the train itself than her brother's departure. The house felt emptier without Robert, but life went on. Ruth was developing into a gifted artist, and at 15, she was already selling paintings to tourists who came through Lead. Michael, at 9, had discovered a love of horses and spent all his free time at the ranch with Ryland. Grace was proving to be a perfect blend of her siblings, with Robert's intelligence, Ruth's creativity, and Michael's energy. In 1893, when Rebecca was 41 and Ryland was 45, they received a letter from Robert. He had been accepted to Harvard University and would be studying law. The pride they felt was almost overwhelming. "Our son is going to Harvard," Rebecca said, reading the letter for the 10th time. "Harvard, I can barely believe it." "He gets that from you," Ryland said. "Your determination, your refusal to accept limitations. He gets it from both of us. From you learning to forgive yourself and build a new life. From me refusing to be quiet just because people preferred it. We made a good team, Ryland Anders. The best team." That summer, they took a family trip to the wildflower meadow where Ryland and Rebecca had first really talked all those years ago. The children ran through the lupine and balsam root, while Ryland and Rebecca sat on the same rock where they had sat that first time. "Do you remember what you said to me here?" Rebecca asked. "About being silent too long. I remember everything about that day. I did not understand it fully then, how profound that statement was. You had been silent because you thought you had nothing worth saying, or maybe because you thought no one would want to hear it. And I had been talking because I was trying to drown out all the voices telling me I should be quiet. We were both hiding in our own ways. And then we found each other." "And then we found each other," Rebecca agreed. "And we learned that it is okay to speak and okay to listen and okay to be exactly who we are without apology." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I am glad you walked into Henderson's store that day. I am glad you let me talk your ear off about coffee. Best decision I ever made was staying in Lead." "Second best," Rebecca corrected. "The best decision was asking me to marry you, or accepting when I asked you. I honestly cannot remember who proposed to whom at this point. Does it matter?" "No, not even a little bit." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play among the wildflowers, listening to the wind come down from the mountains. After years of Rebecca filling every silence with words and Ryland learning to speak again, they had found something even better: the ability to simply be together, with or without words, perfectly content. In 1895, Ruth left for art school in San Francisco. The house felt even emptier, but Ryland and Rebecca were learning to adjust. Michael was 15 and spending most of his time working at the ranch, and Grace at 10 was proving to be an exceptional student. "I think Grace might follow Robert to college," Rebecca said one evening. "She has his mind for academics." "Are you ready for all the children to leave?" Rebecca considered this. "Yes and no. I am proud of who they are becoming. I am proud that we raise children confident enough to chase their dreams wherever they lead. But I will also miss the noise and chaos of a full house. We will have grandchildren eventually. There will be noise again." Rebecca brightened at this. "You are right. And I am going to be the grandmother who spoils them terribly and teaches them to never be quiet about what they believe in. I would expect nothing less." In 1897, Robert graduated from Harvard with honors and accepted a position at a law firm in Boston. Ruth was thriving in San Francisco, her paintings hanging in galleries and earning praise from critics. Michael had decided he wanted to work the ranch with Ryland, and at 17, He was already proving himself a capable hand. Grace was talking about becoming a teacher. "We did well," Ryland said one night as he and Rebecca got ready for bed. "Our children are all finding their own paths, and they are good paths." "We did very well," Rebecca agreed. "We gave them love and support and the freedom to be themselves. That is all any parent can really do. You gave them that. You showed them how to live authentically. We did it together. Everything we have done together." In 1899, Robert married a woman he had met at Harvard, a fellow lawyer named Caroline. They married in Boston, and Ryland and Rebecca made the long journey east for the wedding. It was the first time they had left the Dakota territory in over 20 years, and the contrast between the rough frontier they knew and the sophisticated eastern cities was stark. "I prefer Lead," Rebecca whispered to Ryland during the elaborate wedding reception. "All these people with their formal manners and careful words. I feel like I have to watch every sentence that comes out of my mouth." "Then we will go home soon," Ryland promised, "back to where you can be yourself." They did go home, but not before spending time with Robert and meeting Caroline properly. To their relief, Caroline seemed unbothered by Rebecca's tendency to talk extensively about any and every subject. In fact, she seemed to enjoy it. "Your mother is wonderful," Caroline told Robert in their hearing. "So intelligent and passionate. I hope I am half as impressive when I am her age." "You like her?" Robert asked, sounding surprised. "Of course I like her. Why would I not?" "Well, she talks a lot. Some people find it off-putting." Caroline laughed. "Only boring people with nothing interesting to say would find your mother off-putting. I think she is marvelous." Rebecca squeezed Ryland's hand. After all these years, after all the judgments and criticisms, it still felt validating to be accepted as she was. They returned to Lead in time for the new century. On January 1, 1900, they stood on their porch watching fireworks over the town, surrounded by Michael and Grace, and marveled at how much had changed since that day in 1876 when Ryland had walked into Henderson's general store. "A new century," Rebecca said. "Can you believe it?" "I can barely believe the last 24 years, Ryland admitted. "Sometimes I still expect to wake up and find this was all a dream. If it is a dream, let us never wake up." In 1901, Ruth married a fellow artist in San Francisco. The wedding was small and intimate, and Ryland and Rebecca made the journey west to attend. Seeing their daughter so happy, so confident in herself and her choices, filled them with pride. "She got your strength," Ryland told Rebecca as they watched Ruth and her new husband dance. "Your refusal to conform to what others expect. She got your quiet confidence, the knowledge that she does not need to prove anything to anyone except herself." In 1902, Caroline gave birth to twins, making Ryland and Rebecca grandparents for the first time. They traveled to Boston to meet the babies, a boy and a girl named Thomas and Elizabeth. "They named him Thomas," Rebecca said, tears streaming down her face as she held the tiny boy. "After my first husband." "A good name," Ryland said, cradling Elizabeth with a gentleness that belied his weathered cowboy exterior. "A good man deserves to be remembered." When they returned to Lead, they brought stories of their grandchildren that they told to anyone who would listen. Rebecca, true to her word, immediately began sewing clothes to send to the twins, despite the fact that they would probably outgrow them before the packages even arrived. In 1904, Michael married a local girl named Sarah whom he had known since childhood. They had a simple wedding in Lead, and Ryland officially made Michael a full partner in the ranch. At 24, Michael was ready to take on more responsibility, and Ryland was ready to step back slightly. "I am getting old," Ryland told Rebecca that night. 56. When did that happen?" "You are not old. You are distinguished. There is a difference. Rebecca, at 52, was still as energetic as ever, still running her sewing business and writing her third book. Besides, we have earned the right to slow down a little. We have worked hard our entire lives. Maybe it is time to enjoy the fruits of that labor. What would we do with leisure time? I have some ideas, Rebecca said with a smile. We could travel more. We could spend more time with the grandchildren. We could finally take that trip to San Francisco to see Ruth's gallery. We could do all the things we have been too busy to do. They did start traveling more. They visited Robert and Caroline in Boston, where Rebecca delighted in taking her grandchildren to parks and museums while talking to them about everything from art to politics, to the importance of always speaking their minds. They went to San Francisco to see Ruth's latest exhibition, where her paintings were praised by critics as capturing the wild spirit of the West with unprecedented emotional depth. In 1906, Grace left for college in Chicago to study education. At 16, she was the youngest of their children to leave home, but also the most prepared. She had been studying independently for years, encouraged by Rebecca's belief that education was the path to freedom. And then there were two, Rebecca said as she and Ryland waved goodbye to Grace at the train station. Actually three, Ryland corrected. Michael and Sarah are still here. Yes, but they have their own house now. It is just us in the cabin. For the first time in 25 years, we are alone. That night, sitting in their suddenly quiet house, they looked at each other across the dinner table and started laughing. What do we do now? Rebecca asked. I have been surrounded by noise and chaos for so long, I barely remember what silence sounds like. We do not have to be silent, Ryland said. You can keep talking. I will keep listening. Same as always. You are not tired of my voice after all these years. Never. I could listen to you talk for another 25 years and never get tired of it. Rebecca smiled, that same bright smile that had caught his attention all those years ago in Henderson's store. Then I suppose I had better keep talking. I would hate to disappoint you, and she did keep talking. About her plans for her next book, about the letters she received from their children, about the state of the nation and the territory, about her ideas for expanding her business, about the garden and the weather and 1,000 other subjects that might have seemed trivial but were important because they were hers. And Ryland kept listening, because every word she said was proof that they were both still here, still alive, still together after everything they had survived and overcome. In 1908, Ruth had her first child, a daughter named Rebecca after her grandmother. The pride and joy Rebecca felt at having a grandchild named for her was almost overwhelming. They named her after me, she kept saying, looking at the photograph Ruth had sent. After me. The woman who supposedly talks too much for a wife. They thought I was worthy of passing my name to the next generation. Of course you are worthy, Ryland said. You have always been worthy. In 1910, Michael and Sarah had their first child, a son they named Ryland. Now both Ryland and Rebecca had grandchildren bearing their names, and the legacy they had built together felt more real than ever. We started with nothing, Rebecca said as they sat on their porch, now well worn from decades of use. Just two broken people trying to figure out how to be whole. And now look at what we have built. 4 children, all successful and happy, grandchildren, a business, a ranch, a life. We built it together, Ryland said. I could not have done any of this without you. We saved each other, Rebecca said softly. I pulled you out of the silence, and you gave me the space to speak without judgment. We gave each other permission to be fully ourselves. In 1912, Grace graduated from college and returned to lead to teach at the school she had attended as a child. She was 22, confident and brilliant, and Rebecca cried with pride at the graduation ceremony. "That is our daughter," she said to anyone who would listen. "Our daughter, the teacher. She is going to change lives just like we changed each other's." That fall, Robert wrote to say that Caroline was pregnant with their third child. Ruth was pregnant with her second. The family was growing, expanding, becoming something larger than either Ryland or Rebecca had ever imagined. "We are going to need a bigger house for family gatherings," Rebecca joked. "We are running out of room. We will figure it out. We always do." In 1915, they celebrated their 38th wedding anniversary. Ryland was 67, Rebecca was 63, and they had been married longer than many of their neighbors had been alive. The town of Lead had changed dramatically since they had first arrived, but some things remained constant. Mr. Henderson's general store was still there, now run by his son. Mrs. Templeton had passed away peacefully in her sleep 5 years earlier, but her legacy lived on in the boarding house that still bore her name. 38 years, Rebecca marveled as they sat in their wildflower meadow, a tradition they had maintained every summer since that first day. "When you walked into Henderson's store all those years ago, did you ever imagine we would be here?" "No," Ryland admitted. "I could not imagine any of this. A future, a family, happiness. It all seemed impossible." But it was not impossible. It was just waiting for us to be brave enough to reach for it. You were brave enough. You did the reaching. I just followed. You were brave too. It takes courage to change, to leave behind who you were and become who you want to be. You did that, Ryland. You chose a better life and you built it with your own hands." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the wildflowers sway in the breeze, listening to the sounds of the world around them. After decades together, they had learned that love was not just in the grand gestures or dramatic moments. It was in the quiet, steady presence. It was in the listening, and the speaking and the simple act of choosing each other, day after day, year after year. In 1918, the world was consumed by war and plague, but Ryland and Rebecca's family remained mostly untouched. Their children were too old or too settled to be drafted, and while the Spanish flu took many lives in Lead, their family was spared. They counted their blessings and held each other closer, aware of how fragile life could be. "We have been lucky," Rebecca said one night as news of the war's end reached them. "So very lucky." "Blessed," Ryland corrected. "I do not believe in luck. I believe we were meant to find each other. Destiny. You believe in destiny now. I believe in you. I believe in us. Call it whatever you want." In 1920, Grace married a fellow teacher from Rapid City. It was a small ceremony, but all their children came home for it, along with their spouses and children. For the first time in years, the entire family was together under one roof. Ryland looked around at the gathering and felt his heart swell with emotion. Robert, now a successful lawyer with 3 children. Ruth, an acclaimed artist with 2 children and another on the way. Michael, running the ranch alongside Ryland and raising his own family. And Grace, the youngest, embarking on her own adventure. "We did well," he whispered to Rebecca as they watched their children and grandchildren fill the house with noise and laughter. "We did more than well. We built something lasting, something real, something worth all the struggles we endured to get here." In 1924, Ryland's health began to decline. He was 76, and a lifetime of hard work was catching up with him. His joints ached, his breathing was sometimes labored, and he tired more easily. But his mind remained sharp, and his love for Rebecca never wavered. "I am not ready," he told her one night as they lay in bed. "I am not ready to leave you." "Then do not leave yet," Rebecca said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Stay with me as long as you can. We have more living to do." He did stay. Another year, then another. He saw his first great-grandchild born in 1925, held the tiny baby in his weathered hands and marveled at the circle of life. He saw Michael's son Ryland grow into a fine young man who reminded him so much of himself at that age. He saw all of this through eyes that were dimming but still full of love. In the spring of 1926, Ryland knew his time was growing short. He could feel it in his bones, in the increasing difficulty of each breath. But he was not afraid. He had lived a full life, a good life, a life so much better than he had ever deserved. "Rebecca," he said one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, "I need you to know something." "I already know," she said, taking his hand, "but say it anyway. You saved my life. Not just by giving me a reason to change, but by showing me that I was worth saving. You loved me when I could not love myself. You believed in me when I had given up on believing in anything. You gave me everything." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "And you gave me the freedom to be myself. You never once asked me to be quieter or smaller. You let me fill our life with words and noise and passion, and you loved me for it, not despite it. You listened, Ryland. For 49 years, you listened like every word I said mattered. Every word did matter." They sat together as the sun set, hands clasped, hearts intertwined. That night, Ryland went to sleep in their bed, with Rebecca beside him as she had been for nearly half a century. And sometime before dawn, with the woman he loved more than life itself holding his hand, Ryland Anders quietly passed away. Rebecca's grief was profound but not bitter. She had loved him, and he had loved her, and they had built something beautiful together. At the funeral, she stood before the gathered crowd and spoke, her voice strong despite the tears streaming down her face. "They used to say I talked too much for a wife," she began. "That I should be quieter, more subdued, more willing to listen instead of speak. And my husband, when I met him, said he had been silent too long. Together we found a balance. I talked, he listened, and in the space between those two things we built a life. We built a family. We built love." She spoke for 20 minutes, telling stories of their life together, making the crowd laugh and cry in equal measure. And when she finally finished, no one thought she had talked too much. They thought she had spoken exactly as much as she needed to honor the man who had loved her without reservation. Rebecca lived for another 12 years after Ryland's death. She continued her sewing business, published 2 more books, watched her grandchildren grow and have children of their own. She remained in the cabin they had shared, surrounded by memories and the life they had built together. On a summer day in 1938, at the age of 86, Rebecca returned to the wildflower meadow one last time. She sat on the rock where she and Ryland had sat so many times over the years, surrounded by purple lupine and yellow balsam root. And as she looked out over the landscape they had loved, she could almost hear his voice, steady and quiet and full of love. "I am coming," she whispered to the wind. "I talked for long enough down here. It is time to listen to you again." When her children found her later that evening, she was still sitting on the rock, a peaceful expression on her face, her eyes closed as if she had simply fallen asleep. They buried her next to Ryland in the cemetery overlooking Lead, South Dakota, the town where 2 broken people had found each other and become whole. Years later, their great-grandchildren would ask about them, and the family would tell the story. About the cowboy who had come to town with violence in his saddlebag, but found redemption instead. About the woman who talked too much according to everyone, except the man who mattered most. About how they had built a life together based on acceptance and love, and the simple revolutionary act of being themselves. And in Lead, South Dakota, in the wildflower meadow where it all began, the lupine and balsam root continued to bloom every spring, a living testament to a love that had spoken when it needed to, listened when it mattered, and created something beautiful that lasted long after the voices had fallen silent.